I never thought Alaska could feel like enemy land. No bombs, no Taliban fighters, no gunshots echoing through the valleys, just endless white quiet. But in the hours after the crash, as the snowstorm swallowed our wreckage, I realized quiet could be scarier than bullets. Quiet had weight. It made you hear things that weren't there. We'd been flying out of Ellendorf, a regular training flight over the southern mountains, the kind of mission you barely remember after a week. Our Chinook helicopter was loaded with supplies, crew strapped in, a cold weather practice nobody wanted but everyone knew was needed. The Arctic was harsh, and our leaders wanted us to prove we could move in it. The first half hour went smooth. The second felt like being inside a blender. Winds hit us from the side. Ice formed on the spinning blades, and before anyone could react, the cockpit alarms were screaming. Our pilot fought to keep us steady, but the mountain ranges around Anchorage don't care about skill. A sudden wind pushed us down hard, and I remember the sick feeling in my stomach as the world flipped upside down. We hit hard, sliding across ice and rock. The world became fire and metal screams, then quiet. I woke up with blood in my mouth, my helmet cracked, ears ringing. The cargo area was full of smoke and broken straps. I could smell hydraulic fluid and the sharp sting of burning wires. I tried shouting, but my voice was swallowed by the storm roaring outside. One by one, the others moved. Sergeant Miller, older than most of us, was already pulling guys from the wreckage. Carter, the medic, dragged himself across the floor with one arm, his other hanging limp. Private Ellis swore through split lips as he kicked free from a twisted pile of netting. We'd lost one man in the crash. Corporal Hensley. No pulse, no movement, just a body growing cold faster than the snow piling around him. We gathered what supplies we could save. Our rifles, a few ready-to-eat meals, 2 working radios that gave nothing but static noise, and our backpacks. The cockpit was crushed beyond recognition. No pilots had survived. Storm's not letting up, Miller said, his voice steady but serious. We need shelter before we freeze. That was easier said than done. The whiteout weather meant we could only see under 20 feet. Our GPS was broken, compasses acting weird, the storm pulling the needles in circles, but we had to move. The Chinook's broken body was too open, too obvious a target for freezing to death. Or worse, a fire if the wreck still burned. We walked into the snow, no directions, no trails, just gut feeling. And that's when I started hearing it. At first I thought it was the wind, a low moan stretched thin across the strong wind. But then it changed, shifting sounds, almost like a voice. Not words I could understand, just something that carried feeling, mean feeling. I didn't say anything. I thought it was a head injury playing tricks on me. But Ellis kept looking over his shoulder, his young face pale under frost. Carter stopped to adjust his sling, then said quietly, "You hear that?" The storm howled, carrying a sound that didn't belong to wind. Something was out there, and in that moment, miles from any base, cut off from rescue, surrounded by nothing but mountains and white death, I realized we weren't alone. Snow is heavy in a way that doesn't make sense until you're living in it. Every step pulls at your legs. Every breath cuts your throat raw. We weren't beginners. All of us had done long marches with heavy packs, mountain drills, winter field practice. But this storm was different. It swallowed us whole. Sergeant Miller took the front. He was one of those men who looked like he'd been born with stripes on his sleeves. Tough, steady. The kind of soldier who could tell you were about to mess up before you even realized it yourself. His breath formed clouds in the wind as he looked at the land, though there wasn't much to see. Just swirling white walls that never stayed still. "Keep it tight," he yelled, voice muffled by his scarf. 5 feet apart, eyes on the man in front of you. Ellis fell in behind him, the youngest of us, barely 20. Still had that clean young face that didn't fit the uniform. He tried to act tough, but his eyes kept looking left and right like he expected something to step out of the snow. Carter came next, our medic. He was moving slow, his right arm held against his chest. I could see the dark stain creeping through his sleeve where bone had torn muscle. He gritted his teeth and waved me off when I tried to help. "Save your energy," he said quietly. "Not bleeding out yet." I took the back, looking over my shoulder every few steps. Miller had said wolves hunted these mountains sometimes, but I'd never seen anything move in this kind of storm. Still, the feeling of being followed wouldn't leave. After an hour of stumbling blind, we found a break in the land, a slope leading down into a line of dark spruce trees. Trees meant cover. Miller signaled us forward and we half slid, half fell into the forest. The wind calmed instantly, the tree trunks forming a wall against the storm. Snow still fell in heavy curtains, but at least we could see more than a few feet ahead. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I'd expected creaking branches, maybe the distant crack of ice, but instead it was as if the world had been muted. My ears still rang from the crash. But this was different. This was emptiness. We set up a quick guard area, rifles out, looking at the trees. Carter slumped against a trunk, sweat freezing in his beard despite the cold. Ellis rubbed his hands hard, whispering curses under his breath. "We need a fire," I said. Miller shook his head. "Smoke's a signal. We don't know who or what sees it. Sir, with respect, we'll freeze if we don't." He studied me for a long second, then nodded. "Fine, small, controlled. Nothing higher than the brush line." We searched for what we could. Pine needles, strips of bark, half-frozen twigs. Ellis struck a fire starter until his fingers bled. Finally, sparks caught and a thin tongue of flame licked the dark. The glow threw shadows across our faces, making eyes look hollow and cheekbones sharp, until none of us looked quite human anymore. As we warmed our hands, Miller dug into his pack, pulling out a folded map wrapped in plastic. "Best guess we're somewhere near the Talkeetna mountain range. No communication, no navigation. Closest town could be 30 miles or 100. Ellis groaned. "So we're in big trouble." "We're alive," Miller snapped. "That means we're not in big trouble yet." He spread the map flat against the snow, using his glove finger to trace pretend routes. "We move at first light. Save calories. 2 meals split 4 ways until we find something better." Carter gave a dry laugh. "So that's half a Pop-Tart each." Nobody smiled. The fire crackled, and for a moment it was almost peaceful. The storm hissed outside the tree line, but in our little bubble of light, the world felt contained. Warmth spread back into my fingers. My breathing slowed. Then I heard it again. Not wind, not the groan of trees. A low hum like a chant, too rhythmic to be natural. It pulsed from deeper in the forest, rolling under the ground like distant machinery. I looked up. Ellis's head snapped toward the same direction. His lips parted, and I knew he heard it too. "You hear that?" he whispered. Miller frowned. "Hear what?" The sound faded, slipping back into the silence as if it had never been there. "Nothing," I lied. But Ellis kept staring into the trees, and the look on his face told me he knew better. We took turns staying awake through the night, too awake to really sleep. I pulled the second shift with Ellis. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, casting just enough light to make the trees loom taller. Snow drifted through the branches in slow, heavy clumps. Ellis leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "I heard it again. While you were out. What did it sound like?" He shook his head. "Like voices, but not English, not anything." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Sometime near morning I caught movement. Not clear, not certain. Just a flicker between tree trunks. Too tall for a wolf, too broad for a moose. I brought my rifle up, heart hammering. The shadow slid back into the dark. Ellis leaned forward, eyes wide. "What was it?" I didn't lower my weapon. "I don't know." When Miller took over at dawn, the storm had died. A pale gray light seeped through the trees. Our tracks from the night before had vanished under fresh snow, erasing any sign of where we'd come from. But something else remained. Boot prints not ours. They circled the edge of camp, heavy, purposeful steps that stopped just short of the fire and vanished back into the woods. Miller crouched over them, jaw tight. "No one leaves camp without permission." "Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant," we answered together, but my stomach turned cold. Because I knew what he was thinking. None of us had left, and yet someone had been standing right there watching us while we slept. We broke camp as the gray morning spread through the forest. The storm had eased, but the silence was worse. No wind, no birds, no sound except the crunch of our boots and the rasp of breath through frozen masks. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a mistake. Sergeant Miller took one last look at the prints circling our fire before we covered them with fresh snow. He didn't say a word, but his jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscles jump. Ellis leaned close to me as we packed our backpacks. "Those weren't ours. You know that, right?" "I know." "Then who the heck was it?" I didn't answer because the better question wasn't who, it was what. We started north, Miller navigating by memory and land features. He'd been stationed in Alaska before, back when the Cold War still meant something. He said he remembered ridgelines and river valleys, though after a night like that, I doubted even the best memory could be trusted. Carter limped behind us, pale but steady. He'd cut a branch into a basic walking stick, his busted arm strapped against his chest. The medic's stubbornness was the only thing keeping him on his feet. By midday, we reached a frozen creek. The ice looked solid, but Miller had us spread out, crossing single file with rifles raised in case it gave way. Halfway across, I glanced down and froze. Something moved under the ice. Not fish, not water flow. A long, dark shape slid under the surface. It glided with weird speed, too big to be any animal that belonged here. I blinked and it was gone, vanishing into deeper black. "Move it," Miller barked from the far bank. I picked up the pace, heart hammering. When I reached the other side, Ellis was pale, his breath catching. "You saw it too," he muttered. I didn't want to confirm it, but my silence was enough. We pushed on through the forest, following the creek until it widened into a canyon. Steep rock walls rose on either side, slick with ice. No turning back. We climbed, hauling each other up ledges. The sound of our gear scraping against stone echoed too loud. Halfway up, Carter slipped. His walking stick snapped and he slammed against the wall with a cry. Miller and I grabbed him, hauling him back before he tumbled into the canyon. The sound of his shout carried, bouncing off the cliffs. That's when I heard it again. The hum, louder this time. It came from deep in the canyon, vibrating through the stone under my gloves. The air itself seemed to shiver, and for a heartbeat I swore the ice on the walls rippled as though something pressed against it from the other side. Ellis clutched the rock face, eyes wild. "What the heck is that?" "Climb," Miller growled. Now, we didn't argue. We clawed our way up the canyon and collapsed onto the ridge. The hum faded, leaving only the burn of our lungs and the sting of frostbite nipping at fingers. The ridge opened into a flat area. Snow stretched unbroken in every direction. Mountains jagged in the distance. Miller looked at the horizon through binoculars, muttering curses. No trails, no smoke, nothing. He lowered the glass, his face tight. "We'll head west. If I'm right, we'll hit a hunting cabin or a ranger station. If I'm wrong," he stopped himself. "Stay sharp," we marched. Hours blurred together in a rhythm of snow crunch, breath cloud, rifle weight. But unease gnawed at me with every step. The flat area should have been open, exposed. But I couldn't shake the feeling we were still being watched. At one point, Ellis stopped dead. "Tracks," he said, pointing. In the snow ahead, faint dips marked the surface. At first, they looked like boot prints. But the stride was wrong. Too long, too heavy. And the shape wasn't quite human. The heels sank deep, but the front foot stretched forward into a blunt shape, almost rounded. No tread, no detail. Just smooth weight pressed into snow. "Not ours," Ellis whispered. Miller crouched, running a glove along the indent, his lips pressed thin. "Move out, eyes up." We followed the tracks because there was no other choice. They curved across the flat area, heading toward a line of dark cliffs. As we drew closer, the cliffs revealed gaping holes, cave mouths, black and wide, framed by icicles like teeth. Ellis shook his head. "Tell me we're not going in there." Miller didn't answer. He just kept walking. The cave swallowed us in seconds. Darkness closed tight, our headlamps cutting narrow tunnels of light through the cold air. The walls glistened with frozen minerals, sparkling like stars. Our boots echoed too loud, and every sound carried as though something deeper inside was listening. We moved slow, rifles raised, beams sweeping across the stone. That's when we found the first body. It was slumped against the wall, half buried in frost. A man in faded olive green military clothes, gear rusted, skin stretched tight across bone. His face was frozen in a scream, teeth bared, eyes hollow holes rimmed with ice. Ellis gagged. "Jesus Christ." Carter crouched despite his injury, brushing frost from the man's chest. The patch was still faintly visible. "Sarmy. Not ours," Miller muttered. "Too old. Vietnam era, maybe. But what the heck is he doing out here?" I asked. No one answered. We pressed deeper. More bodies appeared. Some in uniform, some in torn civilian clothes. All frozen mid-movement, some curled as if hiding, others sprawled as though dragged. No wounds, no bullet holes, no blood. Just expressions twisted in terror, locked forever in ice. Ellis whispered a prayer under his breath. His voice trembled, but the sound echoed like 1,000 voices whispering it back. I wanted to tell him to stop, but then my light swept across the wall and froze. Symbols carved into the stone, circles crossed by jagged lines, spirals wrapping into themselves, shapes that hurt to look at. Some glowed faintly, pale blue in the dark. Carter swore, stumbling back. "That's not natural. That's not—" The hum returned, rattling the walls louder than before. The air thickened, vibrating through our bones. Then the lights flickered. One by one, our headlamps stuttered, beams cutting out, plunging us into flashes of black. And in those gaps, I saw movement. Tall, wrong, not shaped like anything human. "Fall back," Miller roared. We turned, sprinting for the cave mouth. The hum rose into a roar, and the glowing symbols flared. The frozen bodies along the walls seemed to shift, jaws creaking open as though to scream. We burst into the daylight, stumbling onto the snow. The silence outside felt deafening after the cave's roar. My chest heaved, lungs burning. Ellis collapsed to his knees, throwing up. Carter leaned against me, shaking. Miller stood still, eyes locked on the cave. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his voice was steady. "We keep moving." "Are you kidding me?" Ellis gasped. "There's something in there. You saw it." Miller didn't look at him. "And it saw us, which means staying still is suicide." The cave behind us hummed faintly. A vibration carried through the snow. Whatever lived in those tunnels hadn't followed. Not yet. But the feeling lingered, that it was only waiting. We turned west again, forced onward, deeper into the wilderness. But the cave hadn't let us go. As we marched, every shadow seemed too long. Every gust of wind carried whispers. And every time I blinked, I saw those frozen faces staring at me from behind my eyelids. The flat area stretched endless, but none of us spoke because the truth weighed heavier than the snow. Something had been buried out here for decades. And now, because of our crash, it was awake. By the third day, exhaustion had worn us down to shadows. We were cold, starving, and silent. Every hour dragged our bodies closer to collapse, but none of us dared suggest stopping. The cave had burned itself into our minds, and none of us wanted to risk staying still long enough for whatever was inside to catch up. The land stretched endless white fields broken by jagged black rock. No cabins, no smoke, no sign of life. Just emptiness that pressed against our skulls, until it felt like the silence itself was screaming. Then Miller spotted it. At first, it looked like another line of cliffs. But as we drew closer, the black shapes turned into something sharper, more geometric, not natural rock, man-made concrete. We walked toward it, disbelief carrying us faster than hunger. What rose out of the snow was not a cabin or ranger post. It was a bunker. A rusted steel door leaned half open, its hinges groaning in the wind. The walls were half buried under decades of snow piles, but the shape was clear. Cold War building style, short and ugly, designed to be forgotten. Ellis stared, his breath catching. "What the heck is this place?" "Not on any map I've seen," Miller muttered. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and iron. Our boots echoed on the concrete floor as we swept the entry with rifles. Rusted desks slumped against walls. Paperwork littered the ground, yellowed and crumbling. A faded U.S. symbol still clung to a peeling door. "Military," Carter said. "Ours, but why here?" We pushed deeper. Dead fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling, icicles dripping from broken pipes. Empty beds lined a side room, blankets stiff with frost. The further we went, the stranger it became. In the main room, rows of filing cabinets stood toppled, their drawers flung open. Maps lay scattered across the floor, marked with red circles that stretched across Alaska's wilderness. Scribbled notes in the margins blurred into unreadable writing. But one word repeated again and again, carved into paper, scratched into walls, even gouged into the metal surface of a desk. "Awake," Ellis whispered it under his breath. "Awake, awake, shut it!" Miller snapped, but his voice held no anger. He was rattled too. Carter limped to a chalkboard bolted against the wall. Half-erased math covered its surface, numbers stacked beside sketches of symbols we'd seen in the cave. Spirals, circles crossed by jagged lines, except these were paired with military notes, measurements, map points, even radiation levels. "This isn't just research," Carter muttered. "They were tracking something." Before I could answer, Ellis called out from the far corner. "You need to see this." He stood beside a row of lockers, one of which had been forced open. Inside was a set of tapes, old reel-to-reel recordings stacked in a dented metal case. He lifted one carefully, brushing frost from the label. The date read 1964. Miller grabbed it, eyes narrowing. Radio logs or surveillance? He looked at me. Find a player. We searched until Carter spotted one in a side office, a dust-choked recorder bolted to a desk. Miraculously, it still had power through an emergency battery pack, long drained but brought back to life enough by a crank mechanism. Miller threaded the tape with shaking hands, then pressed play. Static filled the room, hissing like wind. Then a voice broke through, strained, frantic, recorded decades ago. Test site compromised, repeating, compromised. Entity breached containment. Moving north across range. We lost 2 men already. Doesn't stop. Gunfire crackled faint in the background. Screams followed, cut short. Then the same hum we had heard in the cave bled into the recording, warping the audio until the voice dissolved into noise. The tape clicked off. No one spoke for a long time. Ellis finally broke the silence. It was here. This, whatever it is. They knew about it. Carter's face was pale. Not just knew. They tried to study it. Miller rubbed a hand over his face. His eyes were hard, but fear lurked behind them. Which means it's not some ghost story. It's real. And if Command ever knew, they buried it deep. He looked around the bunker, then back at us. No one's coming to save us. Not if this place doesn't exist on paper. The words landed heavier than the snow outside. Rescue wasn't just delayed. It wasn't coming at all. We were off the map, alone and hunted by something our own government had let loose 60 years ago. The bunker groaned as wind tore through cracks in the structure. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The air felt suddenly too thin, too heavy with unseen weight. Ellis gripped his rifle tighter. We need to get out of here. Miller nodded once. Grab what you can, move. But as we turned to leave, I glanced back at the chalkboard, at the spirals and math written in desperation. A single line of handwriting cut across the bottom, jagged and rushed, as though written in terror. If it wakes, don't follow the sound. We left the bunker as fast as we could. Even in broad daylight, it felt wrong to linger there. The word awake still burned behind my eyes, carved into every wall, every scrap of paper. Whatever they had hidden here wasn't just folklore. It had a history, a long one. The cold hit us like a hammer the moment we stepped outside. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky a pale blue stretched thin over endless snow. The silence was back. No birds, no movement, just us and the crunch of boots. Miller set a hard pace west. None of us argued. We wanted distance. Distance from the cave. Distance from the bunker. Distance from whatever left those prints circling our fire. But distance didn't matter. The sound followed us. Started faint. A low hum beneath the snow, like something huge moving just out of sight. At first I thought it was the wind through the canyons. Then it grew louder, vibrating through my chest, matching my heartbeat until it felt like my rib cage might crack. Ellis pressed his palms to his ears, teeth bared. It's inside my head. Jesus, it's inside. Keep moving, Miller barked. His face was pale, but his stride didn't break. We marched until our legs trembled. The land dipped into another valley. The snow deeper here, clinging high against our knees. Every step was torture, but worse were the shapes. Shadows moved across the ridges, too far to see clearly, but unmistakable. Tall, wrong in proportion. At times one looked like a man. At others it bent forward on limbs too long. They never came closer, but they always kept pace. Carter stumbled, groaning as his injured arm caught against a branch. I hauled him upright, and for a moment I thought I saw something reflected in his wide eyes, a figure standing right behind me. I spun, nothing but snow. We pressed on, but the sun was dipping low, the horizon bleeding red. Miller finally signaled for a halt in a narrow ravine choked with spruce trees. The trees offered some cover, though not enough to feel safe. We built no fire, not this time. The bunker's warning rattled in my skull. Don't follow the sound. Fire would only draw it closer. We sat in the dark, rifles across our laps, breath fogging in faint moonlight. Ellis rocked back and forth, whispering under his breath. Carter stared at nothing, his face hollow with pain. Miller sat stone still, eyes fixed on the tree line as though he could will whatever was out there to stay away. The hum returned after midnight, louder than ever. Not just sound now, light. Pale blue glows flickered between the trees, spirals. The same shapes carved into the cave walls, twisting in the air like fireflies made of cold flame. They drifted toward us, weaving in patterns, pulsing in time with the hum. Ellis broke first. He lurched to his feet, stumbling toward the lights. "Ellis, no!" I hissed, grabbing his arm. "They're calling," he whispered, eyes wide and glassy. "Don't you hear it? They're showing the way." I yanked him back, shaking him hard. "You walk into that, you're dead." Miller was already moving. He slammed Ellis against a tree, pinning him with raw force. "You break formation again, I'll put you down myself. You understand?" Ellis's chest heaved, but something in his eyes cleared. He nodded weakly. The lights pulsed once more, then vanished, swallowed by the trees. The hum faded with them, leaving us gasping in the sudden quiet. No one slept after that. At dawn we moved again. Our rations were nearly gone. Nothing left but a strip of jerky and a handful of frozen crackers. Carter could barely stand. Ellis kept muttering about the lights, about how they weren't enemies, but guides. Miller ignored him, jaw locked tight. By midday, the trees thinned, opening into a frozen lake. Its surface stretched wide and smooth, reflecting the pale sky like a mirror. The only way forward was across. Miller ordered us to spread out. "Stay light. If the ice goes, don't panic." We stepped carefully, boots creaking on the frozen surface. The sound echoed strangely, as though the lake were hollow beneath us. Halfway across, the hum returned. This time it came from below. The ice vibrated, cracks spreading out under our feet. Shapes shifted in the black water beneath, huge and slow, circling. I froze, every instinct screaming to run, but moving too fast would shatter the lake. Then something struck from below. A massive thud against the ice, sending Carter sprawling. His scream tore across the lake as the surface split beneath him. I lunged, grabbing his vest, hauling with everything I had. For a moment, the ice gave way, a black hole opening under his legs. In that instant, I saw it. A face, not human, not animal, pressed against the ice from below, pale and eyeless, with a mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth that scraped the surface. Then it was gone, sliding back into the dark. We dragged Carter upright and stumbled forward, every step a prayer. Somehow the ice held until we reached the far bank, collapsing in the snow, lungs burning. Ellis sobbed, clutching his head. "We can't fight that." "We can't," Miller cut him off. "We don't fight it. We survive it." His voice cracked for the first time, but I saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't believe it any more than we did. The sun dipped again, shadows stretching long over the snow. We set up no camp, no rest, just kept moving, one step after another. The silence pressed close, broken only by the faint hum that never left, always just at the edge of hearing. By the time night fell, I knew the thing in the ice, the thing in the caves, the thing that left prints around our fire. It wasn't hunting us out of hunger. It was hurting us, driving us west toward something. And whatever it was, we were running out of time before we reached it. We marched until our legs were little more than numb sticks beneath us. The snowfield stretched on, endless, featureless, the horizon swallowing us with every step. The storm never returned, but the silence was worse. I would have welcomed wind, even wolves, anything to remind me the world was still alive. But it wasn't, not here, not where it wanted us. By nightfall, we reached another valley. The ground dipped steep, the walls on either side jagged with black stone. It funneled us like a throat, and we had no choice but to go down. Miller halted at the opening, his breath curling in the cold. We moved fast. No fire, no sound, eyes sharp. We nodded, rifles ready, nerves worn to wires. The valley floor was frozen solid. A smooth white sheet broken only by spikes of ice jutting upward like spears. They glittered in the moonlight, but the beauty only made my stomach twist. Each one seemed placed with purpose, arranged in spirals and patterns too precise to be natural. Carter muttered, "This isn't random." No one answered because we all knew he was right. We picked our way through the field of spikes. Each step echoed faintly, as if the valley itself were hollow beneath us. The hum returned, low at first, then rising, bouncing through bone and ice alike. The spikes began to vibrate, ringing like glass struck by a hammer. Ellis clapped his hands over his ears, screaming, "It's in me. It's inside." The sound swelled, building until the air itself shuddered. The ice cracked beneath our boots, jagged lines spreading like veins. Then the valley floor gave way. The ground collapsed, swallowing us into darkness. I hit hard, pain ripping through my shoulder. My rifle clattered across stone. Around me, bodies groaned. Gear thudded. Snow and ice poured down like a waterfall. My headlamp flickered, then caught, and I wished it hadn't. We were in a cavern, a vast hollow room beneath the valley, its walls lined with the same spirals we'd seen in the cave. But these weren't carved. They pulsed with light, alive, glowing faint blue as if veins of some living thing ran through the rock. And in the center stood it. The thing that had haunted our steps, circled our camp, stalked us from beneath the ice. It was taller than any man, its body a pale, stretched form that shifted with every glance. Sometimes human-like, sometimes a beast on all fours. Sometimes nothing but shadow shaped into flesh. Its face, God help me, its face was the worst. Smooth, eyeless, with a mouth that split too wide, filled with jagged glass-like teeth that reflected our lights. It didn't move at first. It just stood, head tilted, listening to the hum that poured from the glowing walls. Then it turned toward us. The hum became a roar. Miller opened fire, his rifle spat muzzle flashes, the cavern filling with thunder. Ellis and I joined in, rounds sparking off stone, tearing into pale flesh. Carter, half conscious from the fall, fumbled for his pistol and fired blindly. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Bullets tore chunks from it, but the wounds closed, flesh knitting like water swallowing stones. It opened its mouth and the roar became a scream, high, piercing enough to rattle teeth in their sockets. Ellis dropped his rifle, hands clutching his skull. Blood leaked from his ears. "Suppressive," Miller barked. "Move, move!" We scrambled, firing as we fell back into a tunnel branching from the room. The creature lunged, its limbs stretching out, claws scraping stone as it chased. We ran blind, boots slipping on ice, lungs tearing with cold. The tunnel twisted, the hum vibrating through every surface, guiding us, hurting us deeper. Behind us, the thing shrieked again. The sound bent the air, warping shadows into shapes that crawled along the walls. I swore I saw faces in them, frozen soldiers, mouths open in silent screams reaching for us as we passed. Carter stumbled, collapsing against the wall. His injured arm hung useless, his face chalk white. "Go," he gasped. "Leave me." Miller grabbed him by the vest, dragging him forward with raw fury. Nobody stays behind. The tunnel spit us into another room. This one was different, lined not with spirals but with bones. Human bones, thousands of them frozen into the walls, arranged like mosaics. Skulls stared from every angle, hollow eyes reflecting our lights. Ellis gagged, nearly dropping his rifle. "This isn't a cave. It's a grave." The hum grew louder. The creature burst into the room, its pale body blocking out the light. We opened fire again, desperation fueling every shot. Bullets sparked against bone and stone, tearing into flesh that refused to stay broken. Miller hurled a grenade. The blast rocked the room, shards of bone raining from the ceiling. Smoke choked the air. When it cleared, the creature was still standing, burned, torn, but alive. It shrieked, the sound making my vision blur. The bones in the walls rattled, jaws clacking open together, as if the dead themselves were screaming with it. Ellis snapped. He dropped his rifle and bolted, sprinting for a narrow passage on the far side. "Ellis!" I shouted, but it was useless. The creature lunged after him, its body bending, twisting, moving faster than anything that size should. He vanished into the dark, his screams cut short in an instant. We were three now, three against something that couldn't die. Miller's face was stone, but his eyes burned. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. "We hold here." Carter shook his head, coughing blood. "We can't kill it. Then we slow it down," Miller snapped. "Long enough for someone to make it out." I looked between them, heart hammering. The walls pulsed brighter, the hum rising into a fever pitch. The creature advanced, its mouth splitting wider, teeth gleaming. We fired until barrels smoked. Grenades thundered, the cavern shook. The air stank of gunpowder and burning flesh, but still it came, step by step, unstoppable. Miller shoved me toward the tunnel. "Go," I shook my head. "Not without—" "That's an order, soldier." His eyes locked on mine, hard and unyielding. "Get to the surface, tell them." "Someone has to know." Carter sagged against the wall, nodding weakly. "He's right, go." I hesitated, every instinct screaming to stay, to fight, but the look in Miller's eyes left no room. It wasn't a plea, it was final. I turned and ran. Behind me, gunfire roared. Grenades cracked and the creature screamed. The tunnel shook as if the world itself were tearing apart. Then silence. When I came out into the night, I collapsed into the snow, lungs heaving, body broken. The valley stretched quiet and empty under the pale moon, but the hum was still there, faint everywhere, and I knew Miller and Carter hadn't died for nothing. They hadn't killed it. They'd only bought me time. Time to run. Time to carry the story out of these mountains. But as I stumbled into the dark, I realized the truth that froze my blood colder than the Alaskan wind. The thing hadn't been trying to kill us. It had been guiding us, and I was still following. I don't remember how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that frozen maze. My legs moved on instinct, one step at a time, while the hum chased me through stone and shadow. At some point, the tunnel sloped upward. The air thinned, colder but cleaner, carrying hints of open sky. I clawed my way forward, palms scraping ice, lungs tearing. My headlamp flickered and died, leaving me blind. But the faintest glow bled through the cracks ahead, moonlight pale and distant. I spilled out of a crack in the rock, collapsing face first into the snow. The night was still, the stars sharp above. The storm had passed days ago, but its effects lingered in the silence. I lay there heaving, waiting for the hum to follow. It didn't, not then. But silence wasn't mercy. Silence was a reminder. I forced myself up, every muscle screaming, and staggered into the wilderness. My rifle was gone, left behind in the cavern. All I had was a knife, half a pack of rations, and the memory of Miller's last order. Tell them. So I walked. Days blurred into each other. I don't know how many, 3, 4, maybe more. I rationed what little food I had, melting snow for water, stumbling west as Miller had told us. The cold never left my bones. I slept in short bursts beneath trees, jerking awake at every sound, convinced the hum would return. Sometimes it did, faint, distant, like a memory. Other times I saw shapes moving at the edge of vision, tall and pale against the snow, gone when I blinked. Once I woke to find prints circling my shelter again. Wide, heavy steps pressed deep into the snow. No stride human. It never attacked. It never showed itself fully, just followed, waiting. On the 5th day, I found the cabin, a sagging structure of rough logs, half buried in snowdrifts. Its windows boarded, chimney cracked. I stumbled to the door and pushed inside. The air smelled of old dust, but it was shelter. I collapsed by the cold fireplace and passed out. When I woke, the hum was there, not outside, inside. The walls of the cabin vibrated, boards groaning as if a storm raged beyond. I sat frozen, heart pounding, as faint blue light bled through the cracks between planks. Spirals etched themselves across the wood in shimmering frost, the same symbols from the cave. I whispered Miller's words, "We don't fight it. We survive it," and then the light faded. The hum drifted into silence. The walls returned to wood and dust. It was playing with me, testing me, but it didn't take me. Not yet. On the 7th day, I saw smoke, a thin column rising in the distance, twisting against the sky. Rescue. I stumbled toward it, half delirious, half dead. By the time I reached the ranger station, my legs gave out. Men in thick coats hauled me inside, voices distant, hands lifting me to warmth and fire. When I came to, I was wrapped in blankets, an IV dripping into my arm. The ranger asked questions. My name, my unit, what had happened. I told him we'd gone down in the storm, that I was the only survivor. I didn't mention the cave, the bunker, the thing. Because even as I sat there surrounded by the smell of coffee and wood smoke, I heard it, faint, deep beneath the floorboards, the hum. If I told them the truth, they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, they would. And then they'd go looking. I stayed at the station 2 nights before the army came. They flew me to Anchorage, patched my shoulder, fed me until I stopped shivering. Then came the questions. A room with no windows, a recorder on the table. 2 officers in dark uniforms asking questions with sharp eyes. They wanted details. The flight plan, the crash site, who survived, who didn't. I gave them what they wanted almost. I left out the bunker. I left out the tapes. I left out the thing that herded us across the snow like cattle. Because I'd seen enough in their faces to know they already knew. The way one officer's jaw tightened when I said we'd crashed near the Talkeetna range. The way the other wrote faster when I mentioned strange sounds in the wind. They knew, and they were waiting for me to say it out loud. So I didn't. They discharged me 2 weeks later. No ceremony, no report to my unit. Just a paper stamped with medical leave and a silence that spoke louder than any words. I went home, but home wasn't the same. Nights were the worst. I'd wake to the hum vibrating through the walls of my apartment, faint but steady. pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Sometimes I'd find frost spirals etched into my window, gone by morning. I stopped sleeping, stopped talking to family, stopped answering calls from command because I knew the truth. Miller, Carter, Ellis, they weren't casualties of a storm. They were sacrifices in a war no one was supposed to know about. A war that started decades ago when men in bunkers thought they could cage something ancient and cold. And I was the proof it had never ended. The thing hadn't killed me in those mountains. It had let me go. Not as mercy, as a message. Every time the hum drifts through the night, I feel it. Not just in the walls, in me. It's waiting, and one day soon, it won't be waiting anymore. People always ask the same question when they hear pieces of my story. How did you survive when the others didn't? I've given different answers over the years. Luck, training, sheer stubbornness, all of those are true in part, but none of them explain it fully. The truth is harder to swallow. I survived because it wanted me to. The mountains didn't take me. The cold didn't take me. Even the thing that walked in the snow, that pressed its face against the ice beneath my boots, that stood in the cavern with jaws too wide to be real, it could have ended me a dozen times over. But it didn't, because sometimes survival isn't a gift. Sometimes it's a sentence. I live with it still. The hum, always faint, always distant, never gone. Some nights I hear it in the walls of my apartment. Other times it's under the street, beneath the ground, as though the whole earth carries its heartbeat. I've thought about telling people, writing everything down, recording a testimony. But who would believe me? A soldier claiming the US government buried something in Alaska that never should have been touched? A monster in the snow, older than our maps, stronger than our weapons. They'd laugh. Or worse, they wouldn't. They'd listen. They'd go searching. And that's what it wants. The others, Miller, Carter, Ellis, they died in those mountains. But in a way, I think I died there too. The man who walked out wasn't the same. He carried something back. Not just memories, not just fear, something else. Sometimes I wake in the dark and find frost spirals etched across my window pane, glowing faintly before vanishing in the light of dawn. Sometimes my reflection in the glass lingers a moment too long, the mouth just a little wider than it should be. I tell myself it's exhaustion, trauma, a mind cracking under weight it wasn't built to bear. But deep down I know better. We weren't the first unit to stumble across it. The bunker proved that decades of soldiers, scientists, whole programs dedicated to caging something that was never meant to be understood. And if history has a lesson, it's this. Nothing buried stays buried forever. So if you ever find yourself in those mountains and the storm swallows you whole, remember this. If you hear the hum, don't follow it. If you see the lights, don't trust them. And if the snow around you feels too quiet, if the silence presses heavy enough to make your ears ring, run. Because some things don't kill to feed. They kill to remind us who really owns this earth. Alaska still belongs to it. You're still watching without subscribing. Fix it now, subscribe, the next story is coming. And in the comments, share your country and the time you're watching this.